So for today's viewer request series video, we're going to start talking about altars. This has been highly requested for me to kind of delve into, describe, explain a little bit more. And so I have been excited to do it, but it's also difficult for me to kind of really get into this fully in my house right now because Vincent is still at a very precocious age and can be quite loud when he's home. And so for videos, it's a little difficult and tricky for me to move around the house and take footage of different altars and kind of talk about those a little bit. But I'm getting a few minutes here before work, and I'm trying to kind of condense some information on altars together to get this subject going, since so many of you did ask me to talk a little bit about it. So I want to start the discussion by reading to you this little info post about altars from the Blissful Witch, Dark Paganism, and the Occult site on Facebook, their page on Facebook. They have a discussion on ways of the witch working with spirits, and the specific way of doing that is the altar. So this is a little bit about what they shared, and I wanted to read this with you because I think it's a really concise way of talking about the importance of altars and why you may want to work with them, whatever your spiritual beliefs or path. The term altar derives from the Latin altere, meaning a high place. In its most general sense, an altar is a space dedicated to the veneration of someone or something. Altars may be dedicated to any spirit. The concept transcends religious and spiritual boundaries. Altars may be public or private, personal or part of an organized religious institution. Altars create a focal point of veneration, potential thresholds or portals to spirit land. They serve as a point of two-way communication between spirit and devotee, a meeting place. Everything involved in the creation of an altar is carefully chosen. Nothing on an altar is random. Altars have a tendency to take on a life of their own. A person may maintain one altar for one spirit or one altar for many spirits. Some sacredness will eventually attach to all components of an altar, and many feel that once something has been included on an altar, it should then be reserved for sacred purposes. Let's see. So the source for that is the Encyclopedia of Spirits. And again, the Facebook page is the Blissful Witch, Dark Paganism, and the Occult. And that's where that information that I just read came from. But I really do agree with this as far as the purpose of an altar and the experience that it's possible to have with an altar, and why it's a valid part of my spiritual path, and why I encourage others, especially people who are in certain spaces in their life, to set up an altar for whatever purpose you may want to. I specifically use altars for connecting with spirit, for veneration of different deities that I work with, and also for tarot and oracle decks and for stones. I venerate these sacred tools. I feel that they are healers in their own right, and part of my working with them involves honoring and respecting them and showing them that honor and appreciation. And so they always have sacred space in my house. And while I love to display them, and so my altars are open to anyone to look at, it is not encouraged for others to touch these items unless permission is asked, and I check in and make sure that that is all right for them to do. Because these are holy and sacred items, and they are used in my spiritual path, in my rituals, in my spell work, in my communion with spirit. They are venerated, and it is important to check in with them before other people, other energies are allowed to work with that sacred space that we've created together. I do work with 3 principal deities, and I've thought a lot about sharing all of them, and I feel comfortable doing that. I work with Kuan Yin. She was the first deity that appeared to me, and so I have a very special, loving relationship with her. And she works a lot with my healing with others when I step into space to connect energetically with other people and work on their healing. I work with Isis. I think primarily Isis at this point in my life, she is my main deity. I connect with her very strongly. And I avoided it for some time, but she made it unavoidable for me at the end. You know, it was happening as occurs with some of our interchanges with spirit. It's time to have an interchange and to have a connection, and they will ensure that that happens. And I also work with Inanna. I work with her in a deeply personal way, and so I don't always talk about Inanna as much as I would talk about Kuan Yin or Isis. But she is really the goddess who has walked me through some very difficult times in my life. So, sorry about that, guys. So, these three goddesses, this trinity of goddesses, are primarily the ones that I have altars set up for in the house and that I work with when I step up to the altar. Now, as far as male deity goes, I work a lot with Odin. I work a lot with Pan. And I also work a lot with the energy that some people would identify as the questioning God, who aligns with Pan, but some people choose to look at him as a darker force in Christianity, etc. And my energetic working with him is healing my own masculine energy and understanding masculine energy in this life. So that's the male deity that I primarily work with. Again, three. I like to work in threes. And so there is space for them set up on my altars as well. But I primarily work with feminine energy, and so they are there and they hold a sacred space for me, and I honor and venerate them on my altars. But they're understanding that at this time in my life, I really work with a lot of feminine energy, and I feel very comfortable with that. So you'll see, I'm going to show you some of my altars, and you'll see the space that's set aside for these different goddesses. And that is really about honoring them. And I also use my altars to honor the wheel of the year. My altars change for every Sabbath, and they will occasionally change for a very specific or important aspect if I'm really feeling that there's a new space I need to step into when the moon hits a certain astrological sign or a certain phase of herself, such as full or dark. Or waning or waxing or new, then I will change my altar around for that if I feel drawn to as well. But I always change them on Sabbaths. And that's really part of how I honor the wheel. And the choosing of the objects on the altar is very, very important and sacred for me. I block off a whole afternoon or morning. And I've thankfully, Vincent's very understanding of this process for me, and so he will play on the floor while I'm doing it. I've found as a mom I've been able to incorporate it because it's so important in my spirituality. But everything comes off, the altar is cleaned, the altar is saged. I'll use Palo Santo if I feel that I need to use that as well. I always use white sage though. And then I will start to read the energy of the space in the wheel I'm stepping into, but the space I'm also stepping into or coming out of in my personal life as well. And so that will determine what decks choose to step into sacred space in the altar. That will determine what stones speak to me and want to come forth and be placed on the altar. And it will also determine what decks want to take a vacation, what stones wish to go to other people, what stones wish to perhaps take a step back and go back out into the earth for a while, or perhaps permanently if they feel that their work is done. And so that's really a direct communication with spirit. So the whole process of creating your altar, setting up your altar, taking down your altar, all of that is a very, very sacred spiritual journey if you allow it to be. And you will have a deep, deep connection with spirit if you choose to step into an altar space. And so remember, we set up an altar to venerate spirit itself, to venerate certain deities, or to venerate people in our lives that we dearly love. Perhaps they've departed or we don't get to see them anymore, or we're concerned about them in some way. We want to send them good energy, and so we might devote a certain area on our altar or even a whole altar just for them. It's always about connecting with spirit and stepping into a creative aspect of our spirituality, whether that's sending energy to another person by having them a picture of them, or a stone that reminds you of them, or a stick that you found on a walk together, or something like that on the altar. We're co-creating because we're stepping into a space of empowerment in this. We're a part of this creative process. And so we're honoring ourselves as well as spirit. We're honoring our own divinity when we step into altar work. So if you approach altar work in this way, It's a deeply personal, deeply spiritual experience. And of course, once the altar is set up, you continue to have that healing, energetic exchange with spirit itself, because you're going to find that you go to the altar in times of distress, in times of sadness, or just when you need to be grounded and in your body again. So like I'm going to show you my kitchen altar, and I will always go to that space if I'm feeling drained or stressed or concerned or feeling like I just can't make it through the day. That's the space I will step over into and stand in front of and breathe in front of and connect to the earth, connect to the sky, connect with deity, connect with spirit. I also will meditate in front of my altars. That is an extremely powerful and energetic working. And if you like to meditate with your cards, if you like to meditate with your stones, this is the space that's just going to amp that up. Once you set aside an area in your house as sacred space, you will see that a tremendous amount of power is present in that space. And so sitting in front of the altar, meditating in front of your altar, even just sitting in front of the altar, you're going to receive a great amount of energetic flow between you and that sacred space that's going to lift you up, clear you, and ground you back into the earth and ground you into your spiritual path and your spiritual experience as well. So altars are deeply, deeply personal, deeply spiritual, sacred spaces where we honor our path, where we honor however we choose to view spirit, and where we also honor ourselves as well. And so it is an integral part of the spiritual path for me, and I would encourage any of you who are considering setting up an altar, again, whatever your spiritual beliefs, to give it a try. You will not regret it. And even if you find it's not for you, it will let you know that it's not any type of worshiping of Satan, the dark energy that some people in Christianity choose to call Satan. It's not worshiping Satan in that way. It's not communing with evil spirits. I don't believe those exist anyhow. It's not about that at all. It's actually really about revering the spiritual in your life, the divine in your experience, and setting aside time in your day to connect with your spirituality. So it is a deeply empowering path and purpose. And I really encourage you all to give it a try. So how do you set up an altar? So you've heard me talk a little bit about what my experience is, but you might say, well, you already have a collection of sacred items. So how do you start to have a collection of sacred items? You don't have to buy anything unless you want to. And you don't need certain tools, even though for a lot of people who follow a Wiccan path or a pagan path, there are certain tools that people recommend you have, and some people say you have to have those. I assure you, you don't need to, but you can if you want to. I started building my altars from things that I would find in nature when I would go for walks. And I would ask, the earth if I could take these items, and I would feel very drawn to maybe a leaf in the fall, a certain leaf on the ground, and so I would bring that, place that on the altar space. Maybe acorns, and then of course stones that I would find on my walks, different sticks that I would find, and then you find feathers. Once you start looking for these things, they come to you in a really organic, lovely way. And so that's how I started to build those things. And of course, I am a collector, so I do purchase decks, I do purchase stones, but I do so very intuitively, and so they do become a part of my altar, but they certainly don't need to for you. I will place certain books on my altar as well at different times of the year that I feel very connected to, even certain works of fiction that I want to bring that energy into my life or explore that energy in a deeper way. An example of that for me is the book Fortune's Rocks by Anita Shreve. I will place that book on my altar at certain times when I'm connecting with that energy. I'll place certain books from Lord of the Rings. So maybe the Two Towers. I really connect with that book in the trilogy, so that might go on my altar. There are so many different things that you can place on the altar. Of course, candles. For me, that means beeswax. But candles can go on your altar. All of these things, once you decide and once you choose and step into co-creation and decide that that is a sacred item, then that goes on your altar. That becomes a part of your spiritual path, and that's what you step into honoring. And again, you may find that those items are always sacred items once they come off of the altar. and that you know they'll go back into rotation on the altar. You may decide that's not the case for you, or you may, like me, know that there are certain times when the stones need to go back into the earth or they need to be given away. And so you'll step into that rotation with your stones as well, or your other sacred items. You know, if there's a certain leaf that you've had on your altar or a dried flower, and then you know it's time to pass it on to a friend once you're deciding to step into a new creation with your altar space. So it's really a very seasonal, powerful spiritual work, and anything can become a sacred item. A bottle cap that maybe your loved one carried one day and gave to you, and that might end up being on your altar, and that's a sacred item. So it doesn't need to be an expensive thing where you purchase a bunch of stuff and you go into debt and then you have stress attached to the sacred items. It should never be about that. Sacred items are things that are sacred to you, and that means that they're unique, and each of us are going to have different items on our altars, and that's a beautiful thing as well. So I hope that this has answered some questions about altars and given you some ideas. I'm going to include at the end of this video a look at 3 of the altars in my house. I do have some other altars, and I'm going to sit with and see how it feels about sharing those. But these are 3 of my main altars. They're ones that I use a lot, and hopefully you'll enjoy taking a look at those. They are my spring altars, so they are about to change over with the next Sabbath. But they are, I really love this setup with these altars, so I am very excited to share them with you. So I hope you enjoy looking at those. So feel free to message me any further needed clarity on altars. I will do more videos on altar work in the future as well. Many blessings to you guys. Thanks for watching. Bye. Okay, so just going along with this idea of altars, and so this is my main altar. And I guess in some ways you could say that this altar is really devoted to Great Spirit, to Isis, and to Odin and his energy. It's not specifically just for that. As you can see, some of my most favorite decks in the world have space here. But this is really where I come to sit, and as you can see, I have a meditation pillow here. Just commune with spirit and come back to myself and understand where I am on my journey. And I have a lot of vulture and crow feathers, raven feathers here. I have a reliquary. Here is a honeybee, because I really, really work a lot with bee energy. I have since I was very young. So just things that are grounding, calming, relaxing, loving. That's what I have in this space. And here is my from my Isis Oracle deck, my full moon draw, which I always do 1 card from the Isis Oracle deck on the full moon, and that card stays up for the whole month, and I work with that revolution through that. This is jewelry that's all stones, comprised mainly of stones that I wear. I like to charge those on my altar. And here is an altar that's devoted specifically to one deity, talking about altars being able to have uses just for a specific deity. And this altar is just for Kuan Yin. As you can see, this is a Kuan Yin statue from Bali here. And the Kuan Yin Oracle deck. And I also have stones and decks that really make me think of Kuan Yin and water energy, the element of water, that type of thing. That's what I have here. So I've got fancy jasper, blue calcite, blue agate back there, some stones that I found, and also aventurine, rose quartz, rhodonite, snowflake obsidian, clear quartz, and white howlite there. Seashells, picture jasper, sodalite, and obviously a large shell here and an abalone shell there with another shell and some more crow feathers. Crow and raven are my central feathered friends. So they're all around everywhere. But this altar is specifically just devoted to Kuan Yin. She was the first deity that ever appeared to me, the first goddess that I worked with, and she is still in the triad of goddesses that I work with every day. And so she has her own altar space devoted specifically just to her. This is a piece of floor apatite right here. It's one of my favorite stones that I have, and so that goes on her altar space. But you can see that this is on the floor, and my house is a work in progress, so this is my bedroom. This is the last room that we're redoing, so you can see there's lots of work to be done, but I love her space on the floor because I can sit and meditate on the floor. I can do yoga right here, and just look at her as I come up, in a sun salutation or whatever I'm doing with my yoga, and really just connect with her energy and have a deep sense of peace. And so that's why I really enjoy having her space here, level with the floor. And I think even once this space is redone, her altar will continue to be on the floor. But you can see the kind of difference in energy of this main altar, which is a working altar, serves a specific but also a large purpose, and just Kuan Yin's altar, which is very calming, compassionate, loving, gentle. Very different energy from the other altar. So you can see that there are a myriad of purposes for altars, and that you can have more than one even in a single space. So here's the main altar again, and then over here I have some of my darker decks, the Mary L Tarot, the Ludi Leska Tarot, and the Thoth Tarot. And those are all together along with Rider-Waite-Smith, Mibramig, and Morgan Greer. So there's another mini altar here. And what you put on your altar doesn't have to have anything to do with what you should put on or that you have to purchase or anything like that. It's really about found items and items that have specific spiritual meaning to you, that are deeply important and grounding, and objects of veneration for you. And that's really what it's about. Okay, so now this is a different altar in the house. This is the altar in my kitchen. And you can see that this has a different feel from the altars upstairs as well. I used to have 2 levels to this altar, but Vincent is now tall enough and old enough where I can't use the bottom level, so I just use this top space now. And you can see that I have a lot of decks here. Isis Oracle, again, I have an Isis Oracle deck on every floor. So this altar is the hearth of the home, and it's a multi-purpose altar for decks to sit and share their energy and their love and receive energy and love. For the stones to really soak up the moon and the sun and to be appreciated and loved there as well. For owl to be honored. This is a strong owl altar. And just a space where I can always go when I just need a second or two to just breathe and remember who I am and remember the path and feel connected to spirit and to energy, to prana. And I may only have a few seconds, but I can always step over here and still be watching Vincent or still be talking to someone. So this is why this altar is extremely important in my home, and this is why it is in the kitchen. It's in the main room in the house where everybody spends most of their time. It's high up enough off the floor that it's safe from little 1-year-olds' fingers, but also from people grabbing and touching. This is quite clearly a sacred space. It's for people to enjoy and to have an interchange of energy when they come to the house, but it is not for them to reach around and grab anything that they want off this altar. And I think that that's pretty clear. This is obviously sacred space. So this is another altar in my house, and it has a specific purpose, that of recharging and grounding, and also being the hearth of the home. This is the center of the house. This is the true spirit of the land here, of my being, and of the energies that I work with.